Thanks for watching our webinar replay for running a profitable FBA business. We're excited to announce Edge, Amazon Seller Summit 2017. Have you ever wanted to speak to Amazon directly about your business? Well, now you can at Edge. Amazon Sponsor Products team will be joining us from Seattle, along with special guests Kevin Reiser of Private Label Podcast and Mike Ziegler of Marketplace Clicks. Tickets are selling fast, so get yours today. You can find the link to purchase in the video description below. We'll see you there.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks as always for joining us today. This is your host and MC of the event here. Today we've got a really meaty topic that we want to cover around running a profitable FBA business. We get a lot of requests from customers here to the customer success team about what are those little nuances, what are those tips that you're learning from all different sellers in terms of how do you really make money on Amazon. And so today, as always, we've got a kind of a roundtable discussion here up in Boston, and just looking forward to having a robust conversation about how to be profitable. As always, we really encourage interaction. We've got a couple of polls that we've got selected throughout the course of the conversation. And then, of course, want to address as many questions as you may have. As you'll notice in the GoToWebinar, there's an opportunity for you to post questions or suggestions in the question box. So we really encourage that. As always, we talk to a bunch of folks every week, but there's so much good information that we can share and also learn from you guys. So just to put a face to the voice you're going to hear, sitting directly across from me is Joe Doobie.
Thanks, Andy. Looking forward to the discussion, everyone. I'm the product manager here at Teikametrics, so really excited to share with you some tips around profitability. And next, we'll also introduce Alex.
Yep. Hi, everyone. My name is Alex Kessler, and I'm a member of the customer success team here at Teikametrics.
Hey, everyone. This is Gari, also on the customer success team here at Teikametrics. Some of you have probably heard from Alex or I before if you're existing customers, or maybe on another webinar.
Awesome. So that's the game. We also have our CEO and founder, Alistair McLean Foreman, which you would have heard have discussion on previous webinars. He's going to be manning some questions and interacting as often as possible.
Yeah, thanks, Andy. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, everybody, for joining. My job today, I'm going to actually be manning the questions. So please send as many questions in on the topics, and I will hopefully elegantly interrupt the team and make this an interactive presentation. So thank you very much for joining.
Awesome. Over to you, Joe.
Excellent. So to go through the agenda for today, first we're going to start off with understanding profitability. What is a profit and loss statement? What should you be looking for? Next, we'll hit on how to compete. Amazon's a really crowded marketplace, so you want to make sure you're competing, and we'll talk about a couple different strategies there. Third, we'll get into profitable tactics. So these are some step-by-step actions that you can take to improve your profitability. And then fourth, we'll talk about common pitfalls. So where do we see sellers tripping up, and what can you do to avoid those common pitfalls? And we wanted to start right off the bat with a quote from Michael Porter of Harvard Business School. You guys may recognize his name from the 5 Forces if you ever took some business classes in college, but this quote really spoke to us, and I'll just read it quickly. If your goal is anything but profitability, if it's to be big or to grow fast, you'll hit problems. And this really spoke to us in terms of FBA sellers, because we see a lot of people get fixated with that top line revenue number and just really pushing on that growth and just sort of forgetting about everything else. But Michael Porter reminds us the goal here has to be profitability, or you're not going to be around in the future.
I think it's such an important point. And in some way, I think, as a seller on Amazon, in some way, it's a little bit like going to the casino. It's just the money is the money real. So when you get those checks that are coming in, it just feels so good, but it's revenue.
Absolutely.
It's not profit.
Yeah, I mean, and we'll talk about that, about how that check that comes in every 2 weeks from Amazon, it's really difficult to say, am I actually making money?
Yeah.
Right. And I know from my experience, this is just recently, but a client that I began working with a few months ago, they were under the impression they were generating $1 million of revenue every single month, thrilled with the results, obviously, but, started planning trips and buying boats and etc. But once they kind of gained some insight into their business, it turns out they were only taking home $3,000 in profit every single month. So that was a little bit of an eye-opening experience. There were clearly dollars left on the table there, huge hidden problems that they weren't aware of just because they were so focused on the revenue. So it does happen quite a bit.
Absolutely. So we wanted to start things off right away with a poll to get you guys engaged here. And the poll number 1 here, let me kick it off. It's how do you track your profitability? So the poll's in progress now. Please go ahead and select your answers. So 1, you can track it with Excel. You can have employees be calculating it. You use some software. Do you engage with a third party that helps you manage your finances, or are you just not tracking it currently?
Yeah, let's give it a couple minutes here, Joe, or not a couple minutes.
Yeah, thank you.
Maybe a minute. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you everybody for interacting. And this is completely anonymous, so thank you so much for sharing it. It's going to be really good, I think, to sort of share what the community is using.
Excellent. So it looks like almost all of you have voted at this point, so I'm going to go ahead and close that poll. And I'll share the results. So it looks like a majority of people have been tracking it with Excel and spreadsheets, and that's what we hear a lot of our sellers using as well. So 41% of people are using Excel, with just under 20% using software right now, and over a quarter of people aren't currently tracking their profitability. So that's a huge opportunity to gain some insight here on the webinar today and to start getting disciplined about tracking your profitability.
I think the 4th one down is pretty interesting too, because something that I've been talking to clients recently about is the accounting. So we're seeing an increasing number of accountants. We've talked about tax in the past actually on our webinars, but specialist accounting services that are focused on FBA businesses. The challenge for reporting profitability, cost of goods sold, and inventory, it's a real challenge. So it's very interesting. I predict that we're going to see a lot more specialty providers in the market that are helping sellers understand profitability and actually from the financial aspect, using that to file taxes and really cutting through all that noise. So that's just an interesting one to think about.
Yeah, I think so.
Excellent. So we wanted to dive right in and take a look at what a sample account level profit and loss statement looks like. So here, this is a very high level. This is your total business. It starts with gross sales, right? Top line. That's what we were saying a lot of sellers may get enamored with or attached to, but that top line means nothing if you don't know what you're bringing in to pay the bills. So we have gross sales to start things off, taking out those returns, that promotional cost to get to your net sales number. And this next one's interesting with cost of goods sold. It's tough because what you see in Amazon, they don't know what you're paying for your inventory, right? And that's one of the big gaps in the check that you'll get every 2 weeks. And the settlement report is it will show you your revenue, it will show you the Amazon fees, but it's not showing you how much cash you outlaid for that inventory or paid in shipping to get it to the FBA warehouse.
Yeah, that's a really interesting one, Joe. So just for the audience there, I mean, if you're talking traditional retail, the question is how do you fit the Amazon fees in? And just to be clear on that line item, we're stating that it should be considered as a cost of goods sold.
Absolutely, yeah. Anything that can be directly traced back to a specific SKU should be counted in that cost of goods sold. That's what the cost put into that SKU required to sell it includes that Amazon fee when you're selling through FBA.
And not to, do you have something to build on?
Yeah, so I was just saying, I was going to ask a question on the timing. I mean, what should a seller do if they can't see that until they've, everything, the transaction's already happened, and then it's going to be two weeks later? I mean, it's ultimately in the settlement report, isn't it?
Absolutely, yeah. So it's all about being able to take that data and marry it with your own data. If you're using Excel, I can imagine it can be pretty complex of having a bunch of different lookups here going between your costs, what Amazon is reporting as costs, but you can't lose sight of it, because if you're not adding all of that up, you're not going to know what your true bottom line
And
is.
it's interesting relating it to the poll, because I'm actually working with a client on auditing their settlement report right now. We have a few tools around this, and we're able to do that, but it's just looking at the raw data. And the thing is, the settlement report that comes from Amazon is a text file that has multiple rows
Right.
for the same transaction ID. So it's not like you can take that file and do a simple VLOOKUP. So the folks that reported on the previous poll using Excel, it's an absolute nightmare just for the shape of the file.
Right.
So it's just a really tricky thing to do.
Right. So going further down the line, there's weight handling, there's advertising costs. So if you're using sponsored products today, you want to make sure you're capturing that in your P&L, knowing how much you're spending on advertising to get those additional sales. That gets you to your gross profit. But after that, there's things that are at the account level, like shipping costs, storage fees, return fees. That will deliver you down to your operating profit. But even after that point, there's other fees like paying yourself a salary or warehousing costs. Electricity, exactly. So even after operating profit, you still have other costs that you should be accounting for. So that was the account level. And the real importance here is to really understand the P&L, not just at that top level for your entire business, but going deeper and understanding what each supplier may look like. And then underneath supplier, what does each product look like? And it's not just a snapshot in time, it's the trends, right? So Alex, I think you've seen this example where a specific product was once a very profitable product from a supplier, but over time it became smaller and smaller.
Right. Yeah. So I see a lot of times the number one thing as of lately is Amazon jumps on your listing, and marketplace is getting more and more saturated over time as people overseas are joining in here. I just think right off the bat, you just need to be consistently evaluating your portfolio, and that's the most important thing. If it's profitable now, there's no you can't ensure that it will be profitable in the future. So evaluating consistently is the most important thing that I found.
Yeah, and especially if you're a seller who has a huge portfolio of SKUs, it's easy for them to fall through the cracks. And we see it all the time where someone thinks a particular SKU is selling well, they've ordered 60, 70 units of it. I mean, we drill down into it, it maybe hasn't made a sale in the past 30 days.
Right.
Or it has made a sale, it's been at a loss, and people aren't aware of that, because as your business grows, if your processes aren't growing to keep up with it, you're going to start to lose track of what's happening.
Yeah, Gary, I mean, and Alex, you both used the word portfolio. I think that's the key word here. This is a portfolio problem. You're basically going into the stock market, which is Amazon, with a certain amount of money of inventory, and trying to figure out how do you deploy that inventory for maximum returns. And it's a portfolio problem, just like a portfolio of stocks. So you have to, Joe's point here is to think about allocation. That precious amount of money, where are you going to put it relative? Everything has an opportunity cost. So make sure that you're evaluating all the way through, just not at the highest level. And that's a tricky thing to do.
And if you're not looking at the unit economics of each product, you're not going to be able to make those smart decisions of reallocating your capital, right? Mm-hmm. So as you see some products that aren't delivering your desired profitability, you want to be divesting from those and investing in winners, doing more of what works and less of what doesn't. So that's the importance of really having your P&L not just at your top level, but at your supplier level and your product level.
To belabor the point,
yes.
I love kind of where you're going about, what was once hot may not always be hot. To use to continue to talk about kind of the stock market relative to Amazon, it almost makes sense to set a floor and ceiling. I'm not talking about price. I'm talking about profitability. It's like if you just were to use a stock, we could just use Amazon as a proxy here for a moment. Certainly you could make 50% on that stock, potentially. But if you set the ceiling to be, say, 20%, and you set the floor to be something at 5%, you're not having to bet for the home runs, but you're looking for consistency in there, right? Mm-hmm. So if you start to see that profit margin, move one way or the other, to Joe's point, if it moves up, you double down on it. If it comes back down, there's something happening in the market, and you're going to want to go to a lightning dealer. You're going to want to do something different. because you're starting to hit one of those boundaries.
The only quick takeaway that I'd like to add for the audience is the importance as you start to scale of holding people accountable for those relationships. I mean, we're working with several sellers like right now. I've got one that I'm consulting with that has tremendous amount of inventory, multiple buyers, but they don't have a compensation or a performance scorecard for each buyer. So the framework that Joe's talking about with the different levels, once you start to hold the team accountable for productivity of that inventory on a buyer level, things get really, really scalable.
And the other advantage of diving into each product's economics is being able to conduct audits. So a lot of people will just simply take the fees at face value, think that that's just going to be perfect every time. But Amazon messes up too. And we've actually seen recently one of our clients who saved thousands of dollars after doing an audit. And I encourage all of you to do this. You can find it under reports, fulfillment, and then fee preview. And you should be taking a look through each of your SKUs and looking at the dimensions and weights there. And there was just a simple typo in one of these sellers' portfolio where the dimensions was way more than the product actually was. So they opened a case with Amazon and Seller Central and were able to fix that fee going forward and get refunded for the over amount that they paid in fees previously.
Yeah, just following up on that, it's actually a case that you have to open to get the item scanned again. And and this is just the reality of it that I know a lot of the sellers can relate to. In some cases, that won't work the first time, but be very persistent. Another seller that we spoke to was actually paying $4 to $5 above just because of it moving into oversize, and they were doing 500 or 600 units per month. I mean, that's just a huge amount of money. And Amazon, they submitted the case, and Amazon actually said everything's fine, and they had to go through 2 or 3 iterations of this until they got the case changed. So I just want everyone to really think about that. It's an obsession around fighting for the lowest possible cost.
Exactly. I mean, and this just gets to the controllable things you have for profitability. Be diligent, have your product level P&L ready, and be able to audit those fees that you see coming in. So, how can you compete better in a crowded marketplace? We wanted to first talk about a couple different selling strategies, right? One being high volume, low margin. So are you looking to pump out thousands and thousands of units at a very low margin? Or on the other hand, are you looking to say, I want to sell less volume, but at a higher margin? So there's risks to both of those, and we'll dive into that. With high volume, low margin, you're really at risk of losing money on each sale if your margins are too thin. So if you're selling something that's single digit margins, if there's something that happens in the marketplace, you get hit with an additional fee, you have to take a price reduction of 10%, you can quickly be losing money. And if your margins are less than 10%, that can go negative really quickly, and you can be burning through cash.
The thing I'd like to add, Joe, I think that's really, really good. Again, I want to give the audience something to take away here, is to think about the ability for you to affect the margins, meaning if you're in a high volume, low margin scenario and you can actually use the volume as leverage to negotiate better manufacturing prices, then you're in a very, very interesting spot. So that's just the nuance I would add between those two buckets. And in some ways, I mean, it's the strategy of being a loss leader. And really, Amazon does give you that potential just because of the sheer amount of business.
Yeah. I'd say to build on that too is the terms that you have with your supplier. Mm-hmm. I think it's something that gets overlooked. I think we touch on that a little bit, but those suppliers are going to try and work you, 180-day terms, 120-day terms. There's a lot of flexibility in there in terms of that cost of capital that you can really take advantage of.
I think the private label and independent brands have the biggest opportunity there. Once you start, I mean, if you just look at the infancy of private label, volume relative to real, manufacturing. Typically, you're producing in Asia, yep, overseas. If you start out, your volumes are just so low. So if you can start to hit more aggressive volume requirements, you've got to think maybe 24 months out, 36 months. What does this business look like in terms of margins further out? Now, if you're a reseller, I would very much agree with Joe's buckets here, because you can't really shift those margins. Alex?
And even farther, just to kind of connect those 2 points, if you're a reseller, what you should be doing is trying to establish those brand exclusive relationships with your suppliers. This is so important because, of course, the market is more saturated. If there's less competition on your listing, that's the best way for you to continue to consistently push out volume on your products. I think that's probably where I've seen sellers have the most success scaling in today's e-commerce industry.
That's a really good point, Alex. And I think on that topic, you're almost talking more about risk. If you can de-risk and ultimately have an exclusive relationship, then you're able to think about margins in a different way, think about volume in a different way, and investment in a different way.
So thinking about where you want to compete, is it price? Do you want to be the lowest price provider on Amazon and try to pump out that volume? If so, you really have to have those lean logistics, strong relationships with vendors, as Alistair was just pointing out, and be able to handle that volume. On the other side, do you want to be competing on product? To Alex's point, do you have brand exclusive? Can you get colors or styles that only you're selling? Does your product have unique features? Are you able to bundle it in a different way than anyone else? Do you have patents protecting yourself? These are all different strategies that you can sort of think about when you're competing in this really dense marketplace.
Yeah, and it's not an either-or scenario.
No,
we have a number of
absolutely.
customers that have a very good reselling business, but then they use some of that money, if you will, to go out and look to create their own brand. So I think it's not an either-or scenario, but you should be very conscientious of the strategies for both those two buckets.
I think the trend is certainly, it's interesting, sort of, I actually started selling in 2003 on Amazon as a reseller, so I've kind of been able to see this change over time. Maybe 2 or 3 years ago, there was a lot of concern, are there ever going to be any resellers in the game at all? What we're seeing recently, which is very interesting, is that brands are actually engaging with the larger resellers and doing these exclusive agreements. And I think that's just an exciting place to be if you're, a real industry expert. Maybe you've got a brick and mortar store, maybe you've got a catalog. It's just a very interesting place. So that sort of reseller exclusive opportunity is a good one.
And I think it's important to understand if you position your product a certain way in one marketplace, you don't have to do it the same way across the board. So I know a lot of people don't just sell in the US marketplace. So you could potentially have a lower priced item or an item that you sell at a lower price in the US, but you could position it to be more exclusive and more of an elevated item maybe in a different marketplace.
Geography.
Yeah,
So,
global sellings, Andy, I know that we were talking to Amazon in Seattle, and there's the whole global selling portal that they're working on. So,
That's right.
So global selling is going to be a big piece.
I think ours onto it. I think that's exactly right. The strategies may be slightly different depending on geography. Right.
But then if you're a reseller, typically a US-based reseller is not going to have the luxury of selling those goods overseas. So it's really interesting depending on who you are, which areas.
Yeah.
So there's product, there's price, and then as a brand, as we're talking about this, what can you do as a brand on Amazon? So yes, you are limited somewhat into the tools you have, but there are a lot of programs out there that I want to make sure that if you are a brand, you're taking advantage of. The first one being enhanced brand content. So this came available in the fall of 2016. So it's been around for about 6 months now. This used to be A+ content that was reserved for Vendor Central only. But what this will allow you to do is add additional imagery, tell your brand story, and it just gives you more space on that product page to connect with your customers. The next would be an emailing cadence. So there are no marketing emails allowed through the Amazon platform. You can't be sending people elsewhere off Amazon, but what you can do is send order fulfillment and related customer service emails. Those are fully within the Amazon guidelines. So what we see a lot of brands doing is following up with customers, making sure they had a positive experience and letting them know that if there is an issue with the order, that they're there for the customer service and to make it right.
And Joe, can we talk a little bit about that? How far have you seen the guidelines pushed? You're not allowed to drive them to your own website, but there's just this interesting. Let's say you buy a shirt, like a Nike shirt, it'll have Nike.com on the label. What have we seen in terms of the follow-up emails as well, and the sort of how do they stop you from branding?
Yeah, I mean, they don't want you sending people elsewhere. They don't want you sending any marketing messages in terms of discounts or coupons for future purchases. But you can absolutely say, we hope you have a positive experience. Please let us know if there's anything we can do. And you can, prompt them to say, if you did have an experience that was positive, please leave us a review. Obviously, you can't ask for only positive reviews, but you can leave that link out there to try to get your review rate up.
Yeah, and I just want to add, there's probably one of the most successful private label sellers is a company called Anchor. So it's a former Google employees moved out to Asia and actually sort of leveraged their understanding of the market. And they actually went public in Asia for around over 100 million.
Wow.
I think that was that size.
Yep.
I bought something from them recently, and I got a very interesting, very well branded, but I was surprised how much information they put. They had a phone number, customer support phone number, and this is one of the largest sellers. So my point being, if I'm a private label seller on Amazon, I am trying to think about how far can I bend the rules without breaking those guidelines. And also, let's say you're a fashion brand, what do the hang tags look like? Is there some way to drive them potentially onto Instagram?
I think you nailed it, though. I think the thing, look, Amazon's the world's best, supply chain company in the world, right? I think you got to think about where can you add additional value to that. It's not as if you can improve supply chain. I think it's customer service. I think what you're seeing from Anchor is exactly what I would expect to see good brand sellers doing, is in a way offering that type of level of service, so that when you think about, hey, I want to get, in this case, it's USB cables or whatever it might be from Anchor, you do think about the brand rather than the actual portal that it came through, in this case, Amazon.
Yeah, the other one, just from my buying experience, I bought some green tea and I got a PDF with recipes. And that, when I received that, I was like, interesting.
Think about what Chewy does. Like Chewy just got purchased for $3.5 or $3.8 billion from PetSmart, but we've been a customer of Chewy. It's just the same thing. We've been a customer of Chewy for the last probably year, and what you get, it's the same product that you would buy from any other retailer, but you get a handwritten note to the dog, like stuff like that just makes you feel good. Right, so I think it's those interesting things. I think the menu or the recipes is a great idea.
I think as well. We've got a great relationship with Amazon. We're talking to them. They're definitely thinking more about the seller, because if you think about what's happening, the Amazon marketplace is now 60% third party.
Yep.
So they've got to really think about how to help the seller. I know that they banned the solicitation around reviews.
Yep.
Obviously, they're pushing to sponsor products, but my gut instinct is that there's going to be more. Potentially, maybe Amazon does let their customer data out. That could be something to think about. The branding thing has to work, though, and I think this is the point here on the brand registry.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we were talking with Amazon last week, and they were talking about how the brand registry program is currently being revamped. So that's going to be rolled out soon. Within this month is the expectation. But what brand registry does is gives you some protection on your listing. Make sure no one else can be selling your product if they don't have the right to do that. And it lets you do some things like uploading products without having a UPC code. So you definitely want to be looking into brand registry and stay tuned to Amazon in terms of what that program is going to look like by the end of this month.
And just to answer some questions here. So Valerie's asking, can these emails be automated? Certainly, there's a number of tools out there. One of the good ones is Feedback Genius. There's another one called Feedback 5. Very, very low cost, very, very simple. Connect straight into your Amazon accounts. Really encourage the the listeners to kind of get that hooked up and do those follow-ups and think about like what you put in there.
Right. And then the last piece we had here for brands is make sure you're paying attention to your product pages and reviews. So there's the question and answer section on your product pages. It's really advantageous if buyers are seeing that the seller is responding to those, giving some good feedback in terms of any questions they may have around the product. And then the reviews, making sure you're taking those negative reviews and seeing, is there a pattern there? Can I help improve my product page? Can I be more clear as to what this product is or what it does? Or can I actually take that negative review and go back to my manufacturing process and fix a bug?
I think that's a great point, Joe, and I'll build on that. A lot of very, very good brands will also use social media in that regard. I spent 4 years at Sonos, as most of you all know, and they've got an extraordinarily robust Facebook page. So you have any question, any concern, they are on the case within a minute or two.
Right.
Like it's just that level of customer service is a way in which to differentiate yourself, right? So I think that's that's a piece of guidance as well, is to use social media to your benefit in that way.
So we talked about competing on Amazon with price, with product, as a brand, using some combination of all of those. But now let's dive into some profitable tactics where you can actually take some action here and understand what to do. So number one, we're going to talk about evaluating your current inventory health. What does that look like today? What does your age of your inventory look like? And we'll get into those details. Number two, we'll talk about setting firm deadlines and the importance there. And then three, we'll talk about forecasting efficiently. But before we get into that, we're going to go with poll number two. So let me kick that off. And here we just want to understand what the most difficult part of running a profitable FBA business is for you. So you should see that up on your screen now. Please go ahead and vote. So some of the options here are metrics, forecasting and restocking. Is it aged inventory? Is it finding new products to source or tracking and dealing with returns?
Yeah, I'm excited to see what this looks like. So let's give it a minute or two.
Looks like over half the audience has voted now.
Yeah, thank you for all of the contributions. This is brilliant.
Awesome. I'm going to close that and share the results with everyone. So it looks like the number one thing you're struggling with as running a profitable FBA business is finding those new products and launching them.
Interesting.
Do you think that's this is the debate? Do you think that's because of competition and products that were once profitable are now being cannibalized, or do you think the audience is just looking for growth?
Well,
I think this is probably because it's an issue that affects resellers and private label brands as well. So if you have your own brand and you don't have a product to start with, but you're interested in branching out, then finding that product that's both selling and people are searching for, that's also not an oversaturated market. That's going to be different. And if you're a reseller, you're trying to get those exclusive relationships, especially as more and more brands go to Amazon directly. That's
really
going to be a tricky area to work in.
I also think, Agar, I think that's excellent what you said, and I'll build on that. I also think it comes down to time in the day. And the sellers that we're talking to, they're doing so many other things, whether it's chasing metrics or trying to forecast or aged inventory. They're spending so much time trying to get their hands on around that bit. It leaves very little time to be able to focus on actually spending all the time needed to go find that next new product.
Which is the most valid, almost. I mean, I think it's, again, very similar to the stock market. It's about having the commodity to trade.
Yep. And
I think that's the precious thing. The other thing that comes to mind as I'm looking at this poll is an analysis that our team did on the life cycle. How long does a product, work for you? And I think it'd be very interesting to know that. There's definitely another topic.
Yeah.
We can do it for another day, but how sustainable is your product line, or if you're a reseller, how sustainable is the brand? Like, very rarely do you see a brand that keeps going.
Yeah, continue to reinvent yourself.
So, fashion, it's innovation.
Yeah. Agreed.
Awesome. Thanks for those responses. So we're going to dive right into those profitable tactics now. Step one, evaluating your current inventory health. Gar, did you want to hit on this?
Sure. So you want to take a look at where your inventory stands right now. So you're going to be looking at how much you have tied up in capital. So you're looking at your inventory, where you have your dollars invested, potentially where it's sitting, if it's an FBA, if it's en route to FBA, if it's on a purchase order, are you waiting on your supplier? You want to look and see what part of your inventory is actively selling versus aged. So you want, in our case, when we say age, we look to inventory that's aged 90 days or older. So it's been an FBA for 3 months or more. You might have a different barometer or metric that you use, but whatever it is, you want to establish that firmly and measure all of your inventory against it, and see what portion of your inventory falls into that bracket. So potentially, if you're a reseller, maybe around 20% is all you would want aged. If you're a brand, maybe it's a little bit more because it's the time it takes to get your products and make your products is maybe a little bit longer. And then you also want to establish firm days of inventory guidelines for yourself. So every time you send in a SKU, you want to know exactly how long it needs to be in FBA. And if it exceeds that benchmark, so whether that's 30 days, 60 days, that's your call to action and that's your prompt to try something different.
Exactly. Days of inventory is such a valuable metric, and it can be a little confusing at first, but what it's basically doing is looking back at the sales rate of a particular SKU. So say you're selling one SKU per day and you have 30 left in inventory. You have 30 days of inventory left until that gets sold out. So you want to be monitoring all of these metrics, know how much inventory you have in FBA, what's aged, what's your days of inventory looking like. These should be numbers that you're looking at every day.
Mm-hmm. And then days of inventory is directly correlated with how often you turn over your inventory, which I would argue is the most important thing that you guys should be paying attention to in this presentation today. Inventory turns. This is how you lower your FBA costs. This is how you maintain profitability, by cycling through your inventory more often. And I think even more so than that, it's the relationship between how often you're turning over your inventory and your margin. So from there, right, like if your margin is decreasing, your sales rate essentially has to increase to maintain the same level of gross profit, and vice versa.
Absolutely. So if you have days of inventory of 90 days, that means you're going to be turning your inventory 4 times per year. And we have an example here now showing the impact of improving those inventory turns. So to Alex's point, if you can take home one thing from this webinar today, it's work on turning over your inventory. Because look at this example. Here you have $500,000 of capital that you've invested. In both the right and the left side is the same exact amount of invested capital, the same exact margins, same selling fees. Everything is held constant in these two examples, except on the left, you're turning over your inventory four times per year, and on the right, you're turning your inventory over 7 times per year. Again, with that same amount of capital invested at the beginning of the year, you're going to be walking away with over $1 million in net profit dollars versus $624,000. So no improvement in the overall gross margin percentage. If you take a look at that bottom line net margin percentage, it's 8% in both cases, but you're able to almost double your net profit dollars just by turning your inventory over 3 more times in a year.
Mm-hmm. And I think like the whole goal of this presentation is, yes, we can say turn over your inventory more often, but how are you supposed to do that? If you have all of this inventory aged here, if you have, projected a DOI, that's days of inventory, that is 15, that means that you're not covered for enough time to even meet the demand. So we're going to be going through actionable steps right now to help you turn over your inventory more quickly. And first and foremost, as Gary mentioned, it is so crucial to set these firm deadlines and then take action. And this should be based off of entirely how many times you want to turn over your inventory. So from there, say you want to turn over your inventory 3 times in a year or 4 times in a year. From there, you're able to actually evaluate the amount of inventory that you currently have in FBA and kind of take action based on those parameters. So typically we recommend looking at your current inventory and seeing anything that's aged over 90 days or anything that has been sitting in FBA for over 60 days and has not made a single sale. But you don't want to be waiting around until the inventory is 6 months old. You need to have these business rules set up right off the bat, and then feel free to take this action. So these are the first steps that we recommend doing. And I would hone in here that these steps should be incremental. You need to be testing these steps along the way based on those deadlines that you set. And like I'm just honing in on the deadlines, I really think that this is the most important thing because it's essentially what's going to allow you to turn over your inventory. You actually need to take the actions that you're setting.
So if it's to Alex's point, so if your action deadline is 60 days, that's maybe when you try a 5% price reduction, and then it's 90 days later you try maybe a 10 or 15% price reduction.
And by doing those incremental changes on those rules that you set up, you don't have to take a 50% price cut at the end of the year to try to sell through this stuff. You're being disciplined and going through and saying, I'm going to take my 5% cut now. If that doesn't work, I'll take another 10% cut. And price reduction is not the only way, right?
Well, I would even take that a step farther, right? Like you might find a sweet spot after lowering your prices by 5%. Your days of inventory might decrease to you selling through your inventory more quickly. And I think that's really important. You need to test the waters a little bit.
Absolutely.
But besides price reductions, I mean, I'm sure a lot of listeners here have some pretty strict MAP policy or unbending prices. I would argue that first and foremost, you should be using sponsored product advertising right off the bat. And if you're not currently doing this, you're beneath your competition that is doing this. Essentially, right? So if you have an advertising cost of sale of 20%, this is equivalent to dropping your price by 20%. So this is really important because there's also other benefits that come with sponsored product advertising, including increased conversion rate. This is more of a flywheel effect than anything. At the end of the day, a sale is a sale, regardless of whether it comes from sponsored ads or organically. It will help your conversion rate, and those incremental changes are really important. From there, you can also go and revamp your listings, update your photos, ensure that your keywords and bullet points and title are all relevant and related to your information.
And the bonus of revamping your listings too is that's a huge lever of your conversion rate, right? So you get thousands of impressions on your product, and if you can move your conversion rate from 2 to 3%, that can potentially be hundreds of more sales. So don't underestimate the power of tweaks to increase your conversion rate.
Right, so if you go ahead and test the waters and things still aren't working after 60, 90, 180 days, I think it's time to just go ahead and consider the commodities. To don't invest in these products anymore. Like you're just having this cash sit in FBA eating into your margins.
Joe used the right word. He used the word discipline earlier.
Yeah.
I was going to interrupt and say how important that is. I mean,
definitely.
Everything that you're saying, Alex, is about being extremely disciplined and just almost cold-blooded based on the numbers and the metrics.
I think to build, and then we'll go back to Alex, we talk to so many sellers every week that are just emotionally tied to their business. You've got to be emotionless. You've got to be stone cold, and it's just widgets that you're moving through the system, right? Alex, just maybe wrap up on your...
Yeah, absolutely. So these are just some options you can take at the end of the day, right? So if you have those great supplier relations, contact them. See if you can return or exchange for, different seasonal items. I know I have a client who has a 30-day return period. So if the product doesn't sell through in 30 days, they can bring it back to supplier for no charge. It's amazing. You can donate inventory and get a tax write-off, which is kind of a charitable option for you to do. And then also, as Gary kind of talked about earlier, consider alternate channels to sell on. Sometimes you can go through and sell the products directly from Amazon to other channels, but you want to make sure that it's actually applicable today as well.
Awesome. So we touched on step 1, step 2, now step 3, forecasting efficiently.
So we talk about forecasting a lot with our customers on our webinars as well. And it's important because you're not only trying to order the right number of something, but you want to make sure it's the right product that you're ordering and also that you're ordering at the right time. You want to look at the acquisition cost for any product. If it has a high sale rate, but it also has a high return rate, it's maybe not worth investing more into.
And this ties right back into having your P&L down to your unit level, right? So understanding what that profit is that you take home for each unit should be informing directly into your forecast for reordering.
I would make sure that as part of that P&L exercise that you're also forecasting for advertising costs. You're forecasting for returns rates, things that you don't know whether or not you're going to meet those or not, but be super conservative, right?
Absolutely.
So I think just be as conservative as you can up front will pay dividends on the most important part, which is profitability.
And a lot of you might use replenishment models for your forecasting, and that's going to probably look something similar to this. And it's important to remember that you're going to be doing this for each SKU. So if you can automate this, or if you can outsource it in some way that's going to be beneficial to you. You want to keep that safety stock in mind, your lead time in mind, and that's how you pick when to order and what to reorder.
And how do you do this if you're a private label and you've got a 3-month lead time from Asia?
So I think with private label sellers who maybe order 3 or 4 times a year, it becomes even more important because you're thinking out maybe 2 seasons ahead. So that's when it's going to be important to keep your pulse on the trends in the marketplace. So not necessarily trendy products, but maybe trends in the industry. So if you're a fashion retailer, maybe you want to be looking at those, like what's going to be fashionable in the fall, what's going to be fashionable in the winter, and where should I be putting my money
I think
now?
it's fascinating how interrelated these are, because then it goes back to the poll question. Everyone's looking to find new products, and I think the advice here for private label is if you can do it with less SKUs and get the forecasting right, that is the power. And I think people looking at the poll are almost too focused on finding new SKUs.
Speaking of polls, we got our third poll here. This will be the final one. So here we want to know, how are you currently forecasting? So I just launched that. So are you using the Seller Central recommendations? Do you use Excel? Is there a piece of software that you're using? Is this something that a third party is helping you with? Or are you currently not forecasting?
It's interesting. We've asked this question in the past, and I would be curious to see. We got about a third of the attendees that have voted. Let's give it a bit longer, but I'm very interested to see how many folks aren't forecasting.
Quickly, just for the audience, I mean, I'm fascinated to know this. Like, that's Sonos, like a company like that. How would they forecast a new product launch?
Oh my gosh!
And
yeah.
just quickly,
Yeah.
in 30 seconds. It relates to private label though too, right? Because
Yeah.
how many SKUs does Sonos have?
Well, 9, 10.
And how much, like $1 billion with 9
Over $1
SKUs.
billion in
So I think
sales,
that's a good takeaway, right?
Yeah.
For everyone who's searching for new SKUs, think about that. That's one
Yeah,
thing.
I think it's bet on the winners. I mean, I think it's market sizing, right? I think that's the most important. That's the most important aspect of forecasting. It's the Apple model, right? It's the same thing. I mean, Steve Jobs did say, probably 10 years ago, because every one of my products will be able to sit on this round table, right? Because it's not about the number of SKUs; it's about how much you can get out of each SKU.
Awesome.
Yes.
So I'm sharing the results of the poll now. It looks like over a third aren't currently forecasting.
Wow.
With
Wow.
another third using Excel, and then about 20% taking the Seller Central recommendations.
How is that even possible? I mean, like Amazon might be the only one getting paid.
Wow.
I mean, maybe.
Yeah, we got
That's
to help.
But
Yeah.
taking 20% of. I mean, yeah, that's the difficulty. Yeah.
Yeah, I think. Look, it's the gold rush, right? Folks are going to Amazon because you can be so successful. I think it's discipline, and even something as simple as this presentation, right? We're going to share the presentation out. Hopefully, that at least gives folks some, at least guidelines to get that forecasting process started.
Yeah, just quickly, there's a website that I've been looking at, very interesting, called Marketplace Pulse, which analyzes all of. I don't know how they do it. They're clearly scraping data, whether that's right or wrong, whatever. But basically, they do some really good articles about how a lot of sellers come and go. So it's actually very difficult to be a sustainable Amazon retailer.
That's right.
I'm going to try and post that link.
And that leads directly into the common pitfalls, right? So we work with a lot of sellers and see a lot of mistakes along the way, and we want to talk about those quickly. So pitfall number 1, returns. What I encourage sellers to do is look at returns on a cohort basis. So what does that mean? That means looking back at the order date. And this is particularly interesting for sellers who have very seasonal products, or if their sales are dramatically changing month to month. Because if you're simply looking at the return date when that came back to you, you have no idea what the actual percentage was of those orders that went out. So by looking at that cohort basis, sorting everything by order date, and again, this isn't super easy to get out of Amazon. This is a case where you'll have to take your order report, take the return report, and do some comparisons here. But when you get that actual return rate, that's going to be very useful to inform your assumptions. So you know that, if I have a 5% return rate or a 10% return rate, what is that actually going to cost me? So in a simple model, you can understand what the impact and sensitivity is. So when you're looking at the unit economics of a SKU, play around with that number and say, if my return goes from 10% to 20%, how does that impact my bottom line? Will that make this SKU not profitable? And again, as Andy said earlier, you want to be as conservative as you can with these assumptions when you're building these models, because if a simple jump in return rate is going to make that SKU not profitable, it may not be something you want to invest in. Where there's an opportunity to get some money back here is doing a refund recovery audit. So this, we've seen sellers missing out on thousands of dollars. And this is another point where Amazon doesn't always get it perfect. And what you can do is really dive into a couple different reports in Seller Central. And what you're looking for are cases where a customer was refunded, but that piece of inventory never came back and Amazon never reimbursed you. So there's 3 reports, and they're up on the screen now. The reimbursement report, the returns report, and the payments report. And you want to be doing a lookup across those and finding those instances where there was a refund issued to a customer, but that inventory never came back and Amazon never reimbursed your account. So we've seen sellers pick up thousands of dollars by doing this audit.
Yeah, I think it's important too. Software can do this. Just number one.
Yeah.
We've had some sellers that have employees. Their full-time job is focusing on
Right.
getting returns back just because it's such a complex product.
Right.
I just think that, again, not even a plug, but to use software, some system, because inevitably you're going to find holes in the system and be able to recover some of those funds.
Definitely. And this is the same case of opening a case in Seller Central with those order IDs, and we've seen Amazon come back, same day, a couple hours later with that refund in your account. So the second pitfall, Gary?
So the second pitfall that you might encounter are stockouts. So as far as pitfalls go, this is a quote-unquote good one to have because it means your product is in demand. But on the flip side of it, if you can't keep up with that demand, if your supply chain isn't strong enough or if your manufacturing isn't strong enough, then it's going to have far-reaching consequences for you because it's going to cause your sales rank to plummet.
This is just to amplify this point, and again, going back to, we have hundreds of folks on the call. The fact that 35% aren't forecasting, if it's not on the shelf to sell, it's the worst.
Yeah.
It's just the worst of the worst. So I don't even know if a good pitfall, maybe not. I think that at the end of the day, you have to have the product on the shelf to sell.
And yeah, we've found that people can have huge initial success with a product and then run out of stock and never be able to climb back up and get that sales rank again. So by staying on top of the metrics, you're able to actually take some action here. And if you know your days of inventory is 15 days, 14 days, it's ticking down, you have some control here. Don't forget about that. So when we talked about aged inventory and the discipline of marching price down or adding sponsored products, here, try testing your price up, slow demand down a little bit if you know you're going to stock out, capture some additional margin and slow down that demand so you don't stock out and you can sort of get yourself through until you're replenished.
Just to build on what Gary and Joe are saying, Amazon's model is the flywheel. And I think once you get out of that flywheel, we've had several customers, the number that it's impossible to get back in there.
Yep.
So just to say it one more time, have the product on the shelf.
Yep. And to go back to what Alex mentioned earlier, it's very easy for someone to take your place. If you have a hot selling item and you stock out of it, there are thousands of people waiting in the wings to claim that spot from you.
Exactly. And right off the bat, a huge thing that I see happen quite a bit is poor product selection.
Right.
Especially as of lately, I've found so many of my clients trying to scale up their business, but they're only focused on these currently trendy items that are more of a fad than anything else. As Gary just mentioned, right? Everyone wants a piece of the next big thing. If you're going to sell the same product as everyone else, there's so much saturation. There's no way for you to continue to be successful. I think that in order to maintain the best type of product selection here, you need to focus more so on perennial items that are selling more consistently rather than, the same product that everyone is selling, I suppose.
And imagine, just as fast as this trend can come in, it can leave and you can be left with thousands of products in inventory with not even able to give them away.
Right. And just because one person had success with one item doesn't mean the success can be replicated. I think that first and foremost, right, you need to make sure that there's a demand for your product. In order to do that, I would go in right off the bat and check the sales rank of the overall category for that product and make sure that it's under 10,000. This is really important, right? Because if people aren't searching for your product, you're going to overstock and have that cash sitting there in FBA eating into your margin. Essentially, the whole goal here is to think of your products like commodities. As we've been saying time and time again, you need to let the market drive your decisions, diversify your portfolio. That essentially is going to mitigate the risk of the entire situation.
I mean, if it's my retirement account, I don't want to put all of my money into one stock, right?
Same
That's
thing.
very, 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 very risky.
Exactly.
So fourth pitfall, uncompetitive pricing. So the point here is, even as a private label, if you get out of fighting for that buy box, you still have to have a competitive offer to get conversions. With sponsored products now, competitors can be right on your product page. And if there's nothing differentiating about your product, if it's a commodity, you're not going to be able to demand a higher price just because you may have a nice image or a title that you think is really catchy. If you're a commodity item, you're not going to be able to get a higher price than everyone else in the market. And then when launching a new product, what we recommend for a pricing strategy is to start with low margins, right? If your target maybe is 20% at the end of the day, start off with 5 or 10% to build that sales rank. And then as you get those reviews, as you get that sales rank, start to test up in price. But starting right off the bat with uncompetitive pricing, you're going to kill your conversion rate. So that wraps up our 4 common pitfalls. Let's go right into the key takeaways for the day. So number 1, you should be tracking your unit economics and know your true bottom line at an account level, supplier level, and SKU level. Don't forget about any fees. Don't forget about your sponsored product spend. Don't forget about returns. Have that built out so that you know your unit economics across the board. Next, optimize your inventory and profit by increasing inventory turns. Remember back to that example where we had the same amount of initial capital invested, but by turning my inventory over 7 times versus 4 times, I made over $400,000 more per year. Then take a disciplined approach to markdowns and other strategies to attack inventory. Mark it on your calendar. Do it every week. Make sure you know your current metrics and have a plan to attack that aged inventory. If you're making small incremental changes along the way, you're going to be way better off than having at the end of the year be stuck with a lot of inventory and a lot of long-term storage fees.
Just quickly, Joe, I just love the word, I think you and Alex and maybe Gary too, just about the incrementality of the opportunity. Because I know you're coaching too. I mean, the team is coaching around sponsored products as well. It's not go from 0 to 10% or 50%.
No.
Just tweak it just to see what those results are.
It's a marketplace with so much data.
Yes.
And by testing these small changes, you can really hone in on what works for you.
You can find that sweet spot.
Exactly.
The 4th point here, avoid stockouts. As we said, you can think that it's a great thing that people love your product, but once you're sold out, you may never see the light of day again. And then the last point here is understand the balance between sales velocity and margin. And then select products that are unique and exclusive. Don't go after the same products at the same price as everyone else. It's really tough to win. So that wraps up the presentation for today. Any specific questions, Alistair?
I think one of just the last ones, when you're talking about pricing, I know you're a pricing expert, Joe. You were doing it at Staples. You previously were at Gazelle.
Yep.
So if I'm a private label brand, how do I know what price to set? And that's come across a bit.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, there's a couple of things that I always look at when I recommend a price point. First is where's the market today, right? So you have to understand where your competitors are and what those offers are. The next would be using testing data. So don't stick with a price and just pick it out of the air and think that that's what you have to go with for the rest of time. You use a model where you're testing on and off each day, and then try testing additional different sales prices or using other promotional features.
Great. Okay, one quick one before we wrap up is a few people have asked the flywheel effect, and I'll take that one quickly. So when we're referring to the flywheel, we're talking about the idea that the Amazon algorithm, the whole Amazon platform is geared around conversion, and it's very favorable to products that are converting. So when you start to see more conversion, you're going to go higher and higher up on the rankings, and it's going to be a virtuous cycle of performance. So when you're thinking of relationships between sponsored products and organic products, that's relevant. You're thinking about stockouts and the negative impact for that, that's relevant. Everything is about conversion, even about pricing.
Absolutely.
Lower price initially to get the conversions up, et cetera, et cetera. And that's that flywheel. Once it starts rolling, it's going to build momentum and keep going.
Yeah, and I'd even say, I know we're wrapping up, I know we got 1 minute or 2 minutes left. I'd even say the policies that they put in place, particularly around long-term storage fees, are meant to incentivize, even there in the warehouse, that necessity for turns.
Yeah.
The flywheel.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah, totally.
Awesome. So we wanted to point out a couple webinars we have. So we're doing these fairly often now, almost every week. So the next exciting webinar that we're offering is marketing a brand on Amazon, and we'll really get into what it takes to market your brand, launch new products, how you can get additional exposure and impressions on your products and your listings, and where you can improve those listings to help your conversion rate. And then on May 31st, we'll be doing a sponsored products demo. We'll be walking through our software, and the exciting part here is Amazon will actually be on the webinar with us. So they'll be joining us from Seattle and talking through, doing a little introduction on sponsored products, and then we'll take a look at our piece of software.
And I'm so excited about that. There's so much sort of hearsay and kind of noise. You know, everyone's trying to be an Amazon expert. We've actually got the folks from Amazon Seattle on the call with us, and they've actually been part of the development of our application. And Joe, on the next slide, I'd like to invite everyone in the spirit of really, really unique relationships, the ability for us to help our sellers communicate with Amazon. We've got an amazing event. It's in New York City on June 15th. We're going to share the link in the presentation here in the chat window. It's called Teikametrics Edge. It's in partnership with Amazon. We're going to be bringing Amazon's team there, talking about sponsored product tactics, really the cutting edge areas of how to be competitive. We want every seller who attends to leave with a competitive advantage, a real understanding of the playbook, and a relationship with Amazon, and of course Teikametrics.
Yeah, it's an awesome opportunity to talk with the team from Amazon and with Alistair and Andy here.
Awesome. So everybody, as always, we're just over time. We usually do a pretty good job of wrapping right on the hour. But if you're still on, thanks so much for the attendance and the interaction. A lot of robust, meaty stuff, as we said, that we'd walk through. We hope this is valuable. As always, we're here to help in any way possible. So look forward to seeing you on additional webinars. Thank you to our customers that are on the phone and to the rest of the sellers that we love to have as customers. So we'll see you on the webinar and like to see you in person on June 15th. Thanks again, everybody.
Thank you.